Let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself when you answer. Have you ever watched someone who seemed to work half as hard as you, earn twice as much, and felt that specific kind of quiet rage that you couldn't even explain to anyone because it made you sound like you were complaining? That feeling. Hold on to it, because that feeling is not jealousy. It is your intuition recognizing a rule you were never taught. I grew up watching my father work 6 days a week. He was proud of it. He wore his exhaustion like a badge, and in the community we came from, that made sense. Hard work was the measure of a man. I believed that for the first 30 years of my life. I worked harder than almost everyone around me, and I kept waiting for the equation to balance. It never did. Not because I was doing something wrong exactly, but because I was playing by a set of rules that were designed for a different outcome than the one I was chasing. Da Vinci once observed that the greatest deception men suffer is from their own opinions. Not their enemies, not the stock market, not bad luck. Their own opinions about what effort is supposed to produce. This video is not going to give you a system or a shortcut. It is going to show you something that will change the way you see effort itself, and once you see it, you will not be able to go back. Here is the idea, and I know it is going to sound wrong when I say it. Working harder is often the signal that you are losing. Not losing ground, losing the game itself. I know that sounds like something a person says when they want to excuse being lazy. I am not talking about laziness. I am talking about something far more disturbing. I am talking about the way the structure of work itself has been designed to consume the people who are least powerful within it. When I first really sat with this idea, it was not from a book, though a book confirmed it later. It came from a conversation with a man I had known for years, who had quietly built something most people spend their whole lives chasing. He said something I have never forgotten. He said, "The men who work the most hours are almost never the men who own anything. They are the men who make ownership possible for someone else." That landed like a stone in still water, because I had seen it. I had lived it. I just had not had the language for it. Da Vinci understood this centuries ago. He spent what appeared to outsiders as long, idle hours staring at water, at birds, at the movement of light through cloth. His contemporaries thought he was avoiding work. What he was actually doing was designing leverage, the kind of thinking that makes 1 hour of application worth 1,000 hours of brute repetition. Machiavelli, who was a near contemporary of Da Vinci's world, and a man who understood power more clearly than almost anyone in recorded history, wrote explicitly that the man who depends on his own labor alone will never be secure. Security belongs to those who understand how force multiplies. Think about a river and a wheel. A man who carries buckets of water from the river to his field every morning is working. He is working hard, possibly as hard as any man on earth. And he will never stop working, because the moment he stops, the field goes dry. But the man who builds a water wheel and channels the river does something different. He works once, deeply, on the mechanism, and then the river does the carrying. Both men are connected to the same water source. One of them has made himself indispensable to the process. The other has made the process run without him. Now, ask yourself honestly, in your life right now, are you carrying buckets or are you building wheels? Not as a judgment, as an honest inventory. Because Da Vinci was not celebrated for his bucket carrying, he was celebrated for his wheel building, for designing systems, structures and mechanisms that outlasted the hours he put into them. Vinci understood what most men in his era refused to accept, which is that intellectual architecture produces returns that physical repetition never can. If this idea is landing in a way that feels both obvious and unsettling at the same time, I want you to drop a word or two in the comments right now. Just the first thing that comes to mind. Could be something like trapped, or awakening, or finally, or I already knew. Whatever the reaction is, name it. That comment matters because it tells me this content is connecting where it needs to. And if you have not already, consider subscribing. Not because I am asking you to grow a channel, but because what we are building here is a space for men who are done being impressed by hustle and ready to start thinking about architecture. That is a specific kind of person. If that is you, this is where you should be. Now here is where it gets harder, and I want to return to something I mentioned earlier. My father. Because understanding why I believed what I believed for so long is the key to understanding why most men fail to make the shift, even when they intellectually understand it. My father was not wrong to work hard. He was responding rationally to the world he lived in, a world where deviation from visible effort was punished socially and economically. The men in his community who stopped carrying buckets and tried to build wheels were often laughed at, cut off, or failed publicly before they succeeded privately. The cost of the experiment was real. This is exactly what Machiavelli identified as one of the most dangerous forces a man faces, which is not external opposition, but the social pressure of the group to remain legible and safe. Machiavelli wrote that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. He was not being poetic. He was describing the mechanics of how systems protect themselves from being redesigned. A second thinker, one whose name most of this audience will recognize immediately, built an entire framework around the same insight in a different century. His core argument was that new ideas are not rejected because they are wrong. They are rejected because they threaten the existing distribution of advantage. That is not a conspiracy. That is just how systems behave when they are working as intended. Machiavelli also warned that the man who relies entirely on fortune will fall when fortune turns. The man who has built structure, who has created systems that do not depend on his daily presence, is the man who survives disruption. Cross every domain with this. Look at medicine, law, architecture, art, business, philosophy. In every single field, the men who achieved lasting influence were not the ones who worked the longest hours. They were the ones who built things that worked without them. Vinci's notebooks kept producing insight for 500 years after his death. That is what a wheel looks like at its highest expression. Now I want to talk to a specific version of you. The version who just heard everything I said and is already preparing an objection. Maybe the objection sounds like, "That is easy to say, but I have real obligations." Or maybe it sounds like, "Not everyone can build a water wheel. Some of us have to carry the buckets or the field dies." Or maybe it sounds like, "This feels like privilege talking. Like only certain kinds of men get to play this game." I hear all of that. And I want you to know that I am not here to dismiss those concerns. Da Vinci himself did not come from wealth or political safety. He was illegitimate, he was from a minor town, and he spent significant portions of his life in financial precarity. Vinci did not have permission. He had a different way of seeing. That is the entire point. The wheel does not require permission. It requires a willingness to be misread while you are building it. Machiavelli understood this dynamic at the level of political survival. He wrote about men who were so consumed by defending what they already had that they never built anything new. Not because they lacked intelligence, because they could not tolerate the social cost of being seen as idle, strange, or dangerously ambitious. Most men choose the bucket because the bucket is visible and the wheel takes time to become undeniable. Da Vinci named similar when he described the human tendency to measure the worth of an action by how much visible sweat it produced. The idea that suffering proves value. That if something came easily, or if it was designed to come easily, it must not count the same way. This is not a moral failing. It is a survival instinct operating in the wrong environment. So here is the real confrontation, and this is the part I need you to sit with. The reason this feels personal, the reason this particular video found you, is because some part of you already knows that the game you have been playing is not the game you want to win. You can feel the distance between where your effort is going and where you actually want to arrive. That distance is not a work ethic problem, it is a structural problem. Machiavelli's deepest insight was not about princes or armies, it was about this: that the man who does not understand the rules of the system he is inside will always be used by it rather than using it. Not because he is weak, because he is uninformed. And information in Machiavelli's world and in ours is not equally distributed. It never has been. Da Vinci's life is proof that a man can redesign his relationship to effort without ever compromising his integrity or his output. What changed for Da Vinci was not how much he worked, it was what he chose to work on and why. He worked on things that compounded, things that built on themselves, things that created leverage that outlasted the hours invested in them. The question I want to leave you with is this: if you were to audit every place your effort goes right now, how much of it is bucket carrying and how much of it is wheel building? And the deeper question underneath that one, which is why the answer to that question may be what it is, whether you chose it or whether you inherited it without realizing you had a choice. Because here is what I know about the men who find their way to this kind of thinking. They are not lazy, they are not entitled, they are not running from hard work. They are running toward a more honest understanding of what hard work is supposed to produce. And that shift from inherited belief to chosen architecture, that is where everything changes. The resistance you might feel right now, that tightening in your chest that sounds like a voice saying, "But that is not realistic," or "But I do not have the luxury of thinking that way," that resistance is worth examining, not dismissing, not fighting, examining. Because Machiavelli wrote that men deceive themselves most thoroughly when they believe their constraints are permanent features of reality rather than temporary conditions of their current position. Da Vinci chose to see his constraints as design problems rather than life sentences. That is the actual difference. Not talent, not luck, not timing. The willingness to look at the structure of your own effort and ask whether it is taking you where you want to go, or simply making the time pass in ways that feel honorable. If you are the man I think you are, the man who is watching this not because you stumbled into it, but because something in the title felt like it already knew something about you, then you are already closer to this shift than you think. The fact that the question landed is itself data. Most men never feel the dissonance. You are feeling it. And that feeling does not resolve easily. It should not. Vinci sat with unresolved questions for years, sometimes decades, before the mechanisms became clear. The tension is not a problem to be solved in a single video. It is a process to be entered. The real question is whether you are willing to enter it. What I can tell you is that the next time you feel that quiet rage, that recognition that someone else is winning a game you did not know you were already playing, do not swallow it. Do not convert it into more hours at the bucket. There is one more layer to this that most men do not want to look at, and it is this: hard work is rewarded differently depending on who owns the outcome. Two men can expend the same energy. One is paid once, the other is paid repeatedly. The employee who solves a problem inside a company is praised, perhaps promoted, maybe given a raise. But the owner of the company sees the solution multiply across thousands of transactions. The architect designs once, The structure earns indefinitely. That difference is not about morality, it is about positioning. Poor men are trained to sell effort. Rich men are trained to acquire control over outcomes. This is why the poor man works longer hours and feels perpetually behind. His income is tied directly to his time. Time is finite. Therefore, his ceiling is finite. The rich man works intensely in short strategic bursts, but he works on ownership, on leverage, on systems that detach output from his physical presence. He is not allergic to work. He is allergic to work that does not compound. Da Vinci did not paint endlessly for hourly wages. He negotiated patronage. He positioned himself near power. He made his ideas indispensable to courts and rulers. He attached his work to those who controlled resources. That was not corruption. That was strategic placement. Machiavelli would have called it prudence. The tragedy is that most men never realize they are competing in two entirely different economies. One economy rewards visible exhaustion. The other rewards structural control. If you grow up in the first economy, the second looks unfair. It feels rigged. And in some ways it is, but not in the way you think. It is not rigged against effort. It is rigged in favor of leverage. And leverage requires something that visible labor does not: delayed gratification of recognition. When you carry buckets, everyone can see you sweating. When you build a wheel for a long time, it looks like you are doing nothing useful at all. This is why the social pressure is so intense. The man redesigning his life often appears idle to those who measure worth by motion. He may earn less temporarily. He may be misunderstood. He may doubt himself. But if he persists, there is a moment when the mechanism begins to turn. And when it turns, it does not require applause to keep moving. This is the real difference between poor men working harder and rich men working less. It is not that the rich man is lazy, it is that he has shifted the battlefield. He is no longer competing on hours, he is competing on architecture. Once you understand that, the rage changes shape. It stops being directed at other men and starts being directed at assumptions you inherited without examination. And that is the beginning of power. Because the most dangerous moment in a man's life is not when he is tired. It is when he realizes he has been aiming at the wrong target with perfect discipline. Hard work is not the enemy. Blind hard work is. Effort is sacred when it builds something that outlives it. Effort is tragic when it merely sustains a structure that consumes it. Da Vinci knew the difference. Machiavelli knew the difference. The question is whether you are willing to look long enough to see it in your own life. This channel is not built on hype or shortcuts. It exists to study principles, decisions, and clarity. Understanding always comes first. But when insight moves from theory into real life, structure becomes necessary. Without structure, even intelligent effort slowly dissolves into repetition. The difference between carrying buckets and building wheels is not motivation. It is architecture. I use a simple system personally to keep finances deliberate, clear, and under control. No subscriptions, no noise, no dependence. A single intentional setup designed for ownership rather than convenience. It's available for those who value clarity and autonomy. The link is below. Clarity always comes first. And if you are, then the next season of your work will look very different from the last. Not louder, not more frantic, more intentional, more selective, more architectural. And once that shift happens, you will still work hard. But you will no longer work hard in ways that keep you small. If this video sharpened your awareness, continue with the next video. It will take the structure further. Support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing if this way of thinking aligns with you. Stay deliberate, stay measured, and craft your presence the way Da Vinci crafted his work, through proportion, not noise.